Dobry dzień and welcome to the Russian Summer Academy 2001. Today I would like to introduce to you Tanzu in a nutshell and give you a short business overview over Tanzu. My name is Stefan Berner and I am a VCPP lead solution engineer focusing and being responsible for modern applications in EMEA. Today I might present to you some confidential information, maybe some information that might not be confirmed, so therefore our typical NDA, non-disclosure agreement. In case I'm presenting you some roadmap items, roadmap might change in future and we are not liable that the roadmap will be realized as presented. Then let's straight jump into the agenda. I would start with the first customer use case, present you the business challenges and the challenges a typical end customer has, and I will continue with a short market overview. What's happening at the market at the moment, what's happening at the customer, what do we see is happening, and afterwards I will continue with a short overview over the Tanzu portfolio. So what's in the Tanzu portfolio, which components are available within the Tanzu portfolio, and I will finish with a short overview what's available in VCPP as of now and what will be available in future. Then let's straight jump into the customer use case. We see within our end customers that a lot of customers are application centric and the customers are asking themselves, what should I do with my application? Most of the customers have legacy applications, as you can see here as a car. The application, the car is working, everything is fine, and the application and the car is fulfilling their purpose. But to be honest, the car is not that nice, so you have a legacy application, and your legacy application, your car, might need some renewal. So what can I do with my car? One of the capabilities and possibilities is to renew your car. This would mean you would have a lift and shift of your application, modernize your application, automate your application deployment, but the application itself, or in our picture, the car will stay the same. So we just polished the outside of the car, we just renewed the car, but the car itself stays the same car. You have, with this approach, you have a low time to value, so lift and shift of your application is quite straightforward, of your end customer's application is quite straightforward, but of course you have the cost and the risk of the migration. The next possibility you would have is to rewrite your application for a hyperscaler. So this means that you change your application, re-architect your application to use hyperscaler functions. What does it mean? So as you can see here in the picture of a train, within a hyperscaler, the end customer is one of many customers and they are bound throughout the journey. As these cars on the train, it would not be good and it would be not beneficial for the car if you try to get out of the train during the journey. So therefore you have quite a login in the hyperscalers. So let's summarize. You have to rewrite your application to leverage hyperscaler functions only. You have quite a quick time to value because you could use already, like you would use Lego bricks, you have already predefined bricks you could use and plug together. But these functions are hyperscaler specific. So as I mentioned, you have a certain login and you are bound to the definitions and to the functions the hyperscaler will offer to your customers. And there is a third possibility of re-architecturing your application. So this would mean you would rewrite your application. So it's still some kind of a car, the same car, but it's a more modern version of the car. So what does it mean? So this means that you rewrite your car that you rewrite your application to use microservices, to use containers. Of course, you have to re-architecture your application. You have to rewrite your code. The time to value is slower, but you invest in the future. So the application, the end customer application is more future-proof, and you have quite a good workload interoperability. So if your end customer wants to run your application today as his premise, tomorrow at yours premise, and hopefully not the day after tomorrow on a hyperscaler premise, this wouldn't be a big issue because you are using standard technologies. There is no issue in moving the workloads around. In our opinion, the last possibility to rewrite, to re-architect the end customer's application to use modern application technologies is the most promising way and the most valuable way for your customers. So we recommend you as a service provider to invest in microservices, to invest in applications. But this is not only a VMware view, so let's look into what the market is doing and how the market is moving. So as I mentioned, a lot of customers are considering or thinking about what they can do with their application. So one of a Gartner research says that by 2025, more than 85% of the applications of the organizations will run containerized applications. It is not just a VMware view that the market is moving to containers. It's the worldwide view, and for example, Gartner confirms this view. So this means that for you as a service provider, it's worth to invest in application technologies like Kubernetes, but not limited to Kubernetes. As soon as you can support your customer with modern application technologies, you can participate and can benefit from this market. So what does it concretely mean for your customers, and why are organizations moving to containers? So if you look into a legacy application, because in a legacy application, and this is a typical DevOps problem, the DevOps challenge, within a legacy application, you will write a patch, you will have a big release, and therefore the code will be deployed very rarely. It might be weekly, but for example, if you look at legacy applications, so in the beginnings of Windows, for example, you had big updates, big packages with a high potential of failure. With the new technologies, you have a more frequently development and deployment cycle. So it might be daily, but it could be even hourly or minutely that the new code is applied, deployed, and tested. So the time to production from the development over the commit to being deployed in production is reduced dramatically. It's not that you have to wait for a big package, but you just can commit your source code nearly instantly into production. The mean time to repair is also much lower than it would be with a legacy application. But why is this? You have two reasons for it. So first of all, you have a more frequent release on the one hand. On the other hand, the patch and the code you apply and deploy into your application is much smaller, and therefore the probability that you have built in some mistakes, and this is a common sense in software development, that your application that you don't ask if your application has bugs, errors, but it's how many. So therefore, the amount of code is smaller in a new world, in a containerized world. And in all over, you are more agile to deploy your code. So from a feature request to being productive and with containers, you are much more agile to provision resources. So in a legacy application, in a legacy world, if your customers, your business requests a new resource, typically if you are in a lucky position and you don't have to procure hardware, it takes a few weeks to provision hardware. Within containers, as long as you have sufficient resources, you almost get instantly your resources. Now let's look a little bit more into the personas and what personas are we addressing. So with a cloud native application, you will have several personas, you will have several hyperscalers. So in future, it will be reality that your application will be spread over several hyperscalers, over several service providers. I know in the Russian market you have certain restrictions, so that AWS or Google or Microsoft might not be that highly adopted, but in general, a hyperscaler in this use case could be a service provider as well. And you will have several components of your application. So you will have advanced services you could provide as a service provider. So for example, machine learning, artificial intelligence, analytics, user authentication, authorization. You will, or your customers will leverage Java, will leverage runtime environments like Java, like Python, PHP, and they will follow the DevOps process. So to develop, integrate, build, and test very rapidly. Of course, you have to provide infrastructure, so containers, databases, networks, media, and the tooling around. And one of the big advantages of the VMware solution is that we offer solutions tailored to the personas. So if we, for example, speak about vSphere with Tanzu, so an infrastructure-centric approach, we as VMware offer for your infrastructure guys a tool set that is already known to the infrastructure guys. So with vSphere with Tanzu, for example, the vSphere administrator can use the vCenter client, the vCenter server to manage and to deploy containers. And it's the same for the languages. So within the Tanzu portfolio, we have some frameworks like a Spring framework, like a Java framework, like Python, but a container interface as well. So we don't force the developer, we don't force the DevOps guys to log into a portal, to use the vSphere client, to use the vCenter server, to do their daily tasks, but we give them their common well-known tools like kubectl. So we don't force any of these personas to use a new tool set. And that was one of the basic design principles of the Tanzu portfolio of vSphere with Tanzu, that all these personas can use and leverage their well-known tool set without the need of learning a lot of new technologies, of learning a lot of new tools. As I have spoken a lot about the different personas, a lot about the different tools, so now let's look a little bit more into detail how the Tanzu portfolio looks like and what we can offer your customers and how the portfolio looks like. So in general, Tanzu is a marketing term is a brand, a VMware brand, where we consolidate all modern application technologies into one brand. And from a high level view, you can divide the Tanzu portfolio into three main areas. One of the main areas is the run part. And to express it simplified, within the run part, there is everything that is needed to execute the code at the end of the day. So it's the Kubernetes runtime environment, Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, vSphere with Tanzu, where a container can be executed on-prem. So we have, for example, a Cloud Foundation add-on, but we have a standalone vSphere with Tanzu as well, and it's integrated into VMC on AWS as a dedicated customer environment as well. But the runtime is not limited to an on-prem use case. So with the run part, for example, you can run Kubernetes clusters on a public cloud or on an edge. So what does it mean? So you could use the VMware distribution, a Kubernetes distribution supported by VMware to run a container, for example, on AWS or on Azure. Or you can run it if you are, for example, in an IoT use case, you could run a container runtime environment in your car to do the first analysis. As a second part of the Tanzu portfolio, we have the managed part. And in my opinion, the managed component is a crucial part and tightly coupled to the run part as well. So it's not sufficient to just run Kubernetes workloads, but you want to monitor your Kubernetes workloads. You want to have a management of your Kubernetes workloads. You want to have a policy management of your Kubernetes workloads, because from my experience, the customers will not just use one Kubernetes cluster, but they might use multiple Kubernetes clusters. So what do we offer in a managed portfolio? So in a managed portfolio, first of all, we have Tanzu Observability. So it's a Wavefront product where we can monitor the Kubernetes environments as well as the performance. But it's not just limited to Kubernetes, so we can monitor the application as well and the whole stack. To give you one example, we have an integration into Tomcat containers, for example. So Tanzu Observability can monitor the whole application, from the application code, from the Tomcat container, through the Kubernetes environment. So Tanzu Observability understands, for example, the Kubernetes entities like deployments, like pods, like services, like PVCs, down through the ESX infrastructure. So you have a holistic monitoring and performance monitoring of the whole environment. As a second product, we have Tanzu Mission Control. Tanzu Mission Control is very often used in combination with Service Mesh. Tanzu Mission Control is a policy engine that can be used to control and enforce policies on multiple Kubernetes clusters. These Kubernetes clusters could be on-prem. These Kubernetes clusters could be on a hyperscaler as well. And to give you one example, for example, with Tanzu Mission Control, you can enforce the registry your customer can use and leverage within the Kubernetes clusters and dependent from the location as well. So for example, you could define that if a Kubernetes cluster is running on your premise, that the end customer just could use your private provided registry. If it's running on AWS, for example, they could use Docker Hub. And you could use Tanzu Mission Control to enforce network and security policies as well. So if you are familiar with the Kubernetes network policies. So you could use Tanzu mission control to enforce network policies over Kubernetes boundaries. So it's independent of where your application, where your container will end. Tanzu mission control in combination with service mesh will take care that the security policies are enforced and your environment is secured independent of the place where your application is executed. And the third part of the Tanzu portfolio is the build part. So within the build part, there are all components that are useful and needed to build an application. So it reaches from some frameworks. So for example, we have support for Spring framework, Spring Boot, we have support for that, .NET, we have support for Java. So quite a holistic support for application development frameworks. And below this framework, we have several components that support the customer, the end customer, to build their modern applications. So we have this Tanzu Data Services. Tanzu Data Services is a data handling big data solution for your cloud native application so that you can handle and manage big data. We have Tanzu Application Catalog. Tanzu Application Catalog itself consists of two components. On one hand, we have a Bitnami catalog, the application launch pad. It's a catalog of curated Bitnami Helm charts that can be deployed within a Kubernetes solution. On the other hand, we have an image building engine as well. So with Tanzu Application Catalog, you can define how your container base image should look like. So you define, I would like to have for example, Ubuntu image, base image, and I want to have installed application 1, 2, 3, for example, a Tomcat and a Java environment within this base image. And application catalog will scan your image and will secure your image. So first of all, your image will be scanned for CVEs, so that you know and it's documented what CVEs are open and in which state your base image is. And you can patch these CVEs as well. We are using some third-party CVE databases to patch the applications as well as document. And this is important, for example, if you are in a payment industry. So, for example, Tanzu Application Catalog can support you in doing the necessary documentation for a PCI certification, for example. The third component of the build portfolio is the Tanzu Build Service. So the Tanzu Build Service is a service that will be connected with your Jenkins pipeline, with some pipelines, can be connected with a source code repository, and whenever you check in your new code into a source code repository, whenever you run the pipeline, you can define what will happen and how your container image will be built. So whenever you check in a new source code, you can advise build service to take a base image out of the application catalog, out of a private registry, compile the code, test the code, install the code into the container image, and then check it into a registry. So what does it mean? So you can decouple the software development from the DevOps. So whenever a developer approves an image, checks in an image, and the base image is built, the more infrastructure, the more DevOps guys can take out this application, can take it out of the private registry, can deploy it into production, and can operate it. So that you are completely agnostic and your interface between your DevOps guys and your application development, guys, will be more smooth, will be much easier. As a fourth component, we have the Tanzu application catalog. So the Tanzu application catalog you may know as Pivotal Cloud Foundry as well. So the application catalog is the Cloud Foundry service, so a platform as a service application for your developers. So in case they don't want to handle with container images, they don't want to handle with registries and so on. So with a platform as a service with a Cloud Foundry, basically you define like a makefile or comparable to a makefile what should happen with your code, how is your code compiled, what dependencies your code has, and then you basically push your code to the application catalog, to the application service, and the application service Cloud Foundry will take care of that we find some place where we can compile the code, where we can install the code, and where we can execute the code at the end of the day. As a last component of the Tanzu portfolio, we have professional services as well. So the so-called Pivotal Lab services. Within the Pivotal Lab services, we have a lot of developers that know the frameworks very well. For example, the Spring framework very well. And these professional services department group will support you as a service provider in modernizing your application. These guys can and will, together with you, re-architect, renew your customer's environment, can help you to re-architect your customer's environment and applications, but they will support you and educate you as well, so that you can do the first projects with the Pivotal Lab services. You will be educated how you can transform and renew your customer applications, and afterwards you would be capable of doing it on your own. So in summary, within the Tanzu portfolio, we have the whole portfolio that is needed for the application lifecycle. We have components to support you to execute the code. We have components to support you to manage the deployed applications, to manage the infrastructure. We have components that support the application developers to build these services, and on top we have professional services that will support you as service provider to re-architect your customer's application, and these professional services will educate you as well, so that in future projects you can renew and re-platform your customers' applications as well. As the last topic within my presentation, I would like to show you what's available within VCPP and how these components are packaged together. So within the Tanzu portfolio, we have packages. So we have three main packages: Tanzu Basic, Tanzu Standard, Tanzu Advanced. And I will touch in a few seconds on all of these packages. At the lower end of the portfolio of the spectrum, we have Tanzu Basic. So Tanzu Basic gives you the capability of running Kubernetes environments on vSphere, on-prem. So this means whenever you have, as a service provider, an on-prem environment in your premise, and you would like to run a Kubernetes, to offer a Kubernetes as a service, you can use Tanzu Basic. So within these Kubernetes environment, you might know, you might not know, we have several runtime environments like the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. We have different versions of Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, so you will be entitled to TKGS. So TKGS, for example, means to use vSphere with Tanzu, but TKGM on-prem, so the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid multi-cloud on-prem as well, as long as your Kubernetes environment is running on-prem. The main management component for the on-prem Kubernetes environments would be the vCenter server in combination with Kubernetes. With Tanzu Basic, you get the Bitnami app launchpad as well, so that you have an application catalog of curated Helm charts to deploy your Kubernetes applications. In the middle of the portfolio, we have Tanzu Standard. Tanzu Standard entitles you and gives you the possibility to run Kubernetes clusters across clouds. So you can run your Kubernetes cluster on-prem, but you are entitled to run your Kubernetes cluster on AWS, on Azure, so you will get the capabilities of running Kubernetes cluster on hyperscalers as well as on-prem. Just a comment within the slide, it mentions TKGM. TKGM is part of Tanzu Basic as well, as long as it is run on-prem. TKGM in this context just want to stress that you can deploy Kubernetes clusters on multi-cloud as well. I mentioned before Tanzu Mission Control, TMC, so because you can deploy Kubernetes clusters across multiple clouds, we have included TMC as a management component. So with TMC, you can manage your Kubernetes clusters running on-prem, running on a hyperscaler cloud, independently of where your Kubernetes cluster is running. Bitnami and App Launchpad is part of Tanzu Standard as well. And at the higher or upper spectrum of the packages, we have Tanzu Advanced. Tanzu Advanced is almost the whole portfolio I showed you, so you will be entitled to run Kubernetes anywhere, be it on vSphere on-prem, be it in a hyperscaler. You will get the whole managed portfolio, so you will be entitled for Tanzu Mission Control, for Tanzu Observability, for Tanzu Service Mesh, and you will have a broad range of build tools. The Bitnami and App Launchpad is integrated, but for example a Spring framework, the Tanzu Build Service, the Tanzu Application Catalog, some SQL services as well. Within these editions, at the moment, out of the box and general available in VCPP is Tanzu Basic. So without any restrictions, you can consume Tanzu Basic. You get the entitlement and the capabilities of running Kubernetes on-prem. We are at the moment in the process of introducing Tanzu Standard into the VCPP portfolio, being available within this year. So meaning by latest end of 2021, Tanzu Standard should be available. Tanzu Advanced is on the roadmap as well and will be most likely available beginning of next year within the VCPP portfolio. Beside the Tanzu Basic, that is GA as of now, Tanzu Mission Control standalone is general available within VCPP as of now as well. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Just to summarize, at the moment a lot of customers are considering and thinking about what their application or what they should do with their application. In general, they have, depending on the view, on a high-level view, they have three possibilities: to rehost, lift and shift, to re-architect to hyperscaler, and to re-architect to cloud-native technologies, containers, and microservices. In general, we are seeing that the market is moving quickly to containerized applications because of the advantages that DevOps bring you, like being more agile, having a lower risk, and therefore we see that the whole market is moving to to a containerized, to a cloud modern application technologies. And therefore, we as a VMware and I personally highly recommend you as a service provider to at least think about how you would like to offer modern application technologies, how your portfolio, modern application portfolio, will look like in the future, and how your portfolio in general will evolve or should evolve to support these market trend. We as a VMware offer you a holistic package of products, of bundles that support you within this journey. And on top of these products, we could offer you support in form of professional services. And now it just leaves to me that I thank you for your attention. I will hand it over to Dimitri. Dimitri will show you Kubernetes and vSphere with Tanzu in action so that you can see that this is real and how you can interact with Kubernetes, what you can do with Kubernetes, and how well Kubernetes is integrated into vSphere. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon again face to face. Have a great day. Bye bye.